Yeah, this is a really important topic, isn't it, Sean? Because going back to the end of the Cold War, the dividend, are we entering peacetime? Actually, what has started to happen is other actors have emerged in the world, and for instance, the Houthi group, and when they got to a position where they could challenge or be in a position of leadership in the Yemen, they then started to raise taxes, and what proportion we don't know, but a lot of that money was spent building up their defence capability, and now they've moved from being a sort of irritant to being actually quite a powerful force that's doing damage in the area of Yemen and the Red Sea.
Yeah, I think there's always a bit below the layers of these things. I mean, that none of what you've said is not true, but it's also worth pointing out that they are a bit of a proxy for Iran as well. And the Houthis attacking shipping in the Red Sea, although the British government is trying to make clear that they're only attacking the Houthis because of the free trade. 15% of the global trade goes through the Red Sea. As now it's been disrupted, it's putting up the prices of everything. You can't. The West had put a military umbrella over shipping using military ships, but ultimately you've got to stop the fighting. And they've said that's because of the Houthis. The Houthis actually have no reason to attack shipping if it wasn't for the fact that, as they have said, we're going with our brothers, Hamas brothers. We are fighting for them to stop, to get America to put pressure on Israel to stop the war. And of course, we must never forget that Iran funds Hamas, it funds Hezbollah, and it funds the Houthis, not just funding, but military equipment and military training as well. And therefore, the Houthis have enough on their plate in Sana'a and the north of Yemen, and peace talks with Saudi Arabia. That they're on a road to legitimacy. The weapons they've got, they're not a first world nation in terms of military capability. These missiles they've got, they've only got them because Iran has been happy to provide them. They haven't used them particularly effectively yet, although we'll come on to how they have hit at least one ship so far. But it does mean that the more you've got these organisations growing and getting a more substantial base somewhere, and they've got the backing of a major power that wants mischief in the world, like Iran, that's when it becomes very dangerous.
Yeah, the Houthis, as you say, a small group, being a proxy for Iran's pretty dangerous. A small group that started off as a very peaceful religious sort of group, now, having some, international status politically as well in the Yemen. Last week we looked at the attacks they made against our ships and the response that we delivered, which was pretty fatal, at least for the 4 boats, and they managed to protect our vessels. The very next day, the Houthis came back with their own response, didn't they, Sean?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's been fascinating is that, as you say, the Houthis have been creating all sorts of threat. We recorded on the Wednesday last week. On the Thursday, the US and the UK mounted a huge series of attacks against specific targets, 60 targets, 150 munitions overnight. Seemed to be targeting Houthi radar sites, missile launch sites, where the boats were being delivered, and pretty surgical series of strikes. Most of the strikes were Tomahawk missiles, which is what you'd expect because they fire and forget, find their targets and schwack them. Whereas the British involvement was 4 Typhoons, which means that the aircraft had to go into enemy territory and put their pink bodies on the line to be able to deliver the ordnance. But it does appear that was a successful series of strikes. But the very next day, the Houthis launched another anti-ship cruise missile. So that led to the Americans doing a one-off, looks like a mopping up operation, with either taking out the radar that they'd missed, or it might have been the battle damage assessment of the previous nice actions that maybe not all of the targets had actually been hit, so they went back to mop it up. But it's really interesting then, the follow-up. Only yesterday, Rishi Sunak's in the House of Parliament sort of speaking to the House, and there's lots of then concerns about what we knew, how much we should be engaged, and the very fact that at the start of the war between Israel and Hamas, we were sympathetic politically with Israel, but I doubt we really wanted to get involved militarily. And since then, we've been providing long-range drones surveillance over Gaza. The last few weeks, HMS Diamond's been firing Sea Viper missiles, which it hasn't fired for the best part of 4 decades before. And now we've got British Typhoons bombing targets, military targets in the Yemen. That seems to me an escalation.
We are being dragged into it.
We are, and that's the concern, is that what next? And also concerns about what is the British government actually seeking to achieve. There were lots of discussion. Are we looking to defeat the Houthis? No, this isn't about defeating the Houthis. This is about saying, if you keep disrupting international shipping, which is having huge implications for global prices, you and I might not care about the price of bread going up a few pennies, but there are millions, in fact billions of people who it does matter. And free trade is really important. And therefore, Houthis, you can't be attacking here. But so this was a rap across the knuckles, take out some of their capability. But of course, they immediately came back. And we've seen another, only yesterday, another missile launched at a US-based or US-owned bulk cargo carrier, which apparently hits the vessel, caused a fire, didn't stop it being seaworthy, apparently no casualties. So what does the British government do next?
Yeah, it must be pretty scary out there. It's okay talking about it sitting in our armchairs here. It must be pretty scary. A lot of stuff's been flying around. So far, we've managed to protect our vessels. The US done the same. Commercial shipping as well, being protected. And yet, a couple of days ago, a Houthi missile actually struck a ship and did some damage. That's pretty scary.
It's incredibly scary. It does sound as if there are no casualties, but it just demonstrates that it's all very well trying to provide a protective umbrella, but eventually missiles will get through. What looks likely is that the attack, rather than being in the Bab al-Mandab Straits, where there's a good umbrella, this latest attack happened 100 miles off the southeast of Yemen. Probably that wasn't the same level of coverage, and therefore the target was probably more exposed. But even so, it's a very worrying development.
And can you imagine the effect on commercial shipping, the companies, the insurance companies now, after that one single hit, there'll be a riot of consideration about everything. Do we do it? What's the costs? What are the risks? What do the employees feel? Wow.
Well, it's also, up till now, it's been focused because the Bab al-Mandab Straits is right next to Yemen. It's the choke point. It's only 20 miles open, and therefore you can see the ships go past. They feel vulnerable. As soon as you're in the open oceans, you don't feel vulnerable. But these anti-ship ballistic missiles can travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles. So all of a sudden now, it's not just about those straits. It could be anywhere in the region. And global shipping, there's a lot of trade. 90% of global trade goes by sea. So at some stage, this has to stop. And regardless of the link to the Israel-Hamas war, the West cannot allow global shipping to come under threat.